I have wrestled this week. I have wrestled with myself, with our God, with colleagues, and with some of you over what to preach this day. So I ask you to bear with me and wait until the end before you pass judgment. I can only imagine what it is like to be female in America this week, when the news has moved what for many has been an unspoken reality to the front page and the lead story of news reports. When friends and family members and public figures have shared openly their shocking experiences between men and women, between boys and girls. I'm referring to the very real, visceral power of words, particularly violent language used against women and girls that is cruel and frightening and pervasive. I'm referring to the very real experiences and unwanted acts of power over, sexual aggression and assault against women and girls that is cruel, frightening, and pervasive. When public figures shout shameful comments about female bodies, proclaiming judgment based on looks and disrespecting the ambition and intellect of women and girls, we should do more than shake our heads or say that boys will be boys. When someone violates another's personal space, stands a little too close, or stares a little too long or inappropriately, we should do more than shake our heads and say that boys will be boys. Misogyny moves quickly from sexual harassment to violence. The devaluing and insulting of women and girls as property, as things, as conquest, is not boys will be boys behavior. It is not acceptable locker room talk. It is a terrorizing reality for 51% of our population. It is a reflection of a rape culture in the United States of America where these comments and actions are pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality, about power and place and privilege. The recent comments by a presidential candidate and the First Lady of our country echo the sin of misogyny, power, and rape culture found in an unjust judge and persistent widow in the parable from our Gospel of Luke this morning. Preaching about the persistent widow and the unjust judge often focuses us on encouraging prayer, on teaching about patience, but we live in a day that patience is running thin. Some see this parable as a call to just keep on praying and God will get around to you eventually. I've preached and emphasized how God is not the unjust judge in this parable. How God is present with the widow and with you and with me. And the parable isn't about admiring or having sympathy for the widow. The parable is about God's empathy and God's love for the persistent widow, for you, for me, and all of God's people. Based on what we know about power and authority, it's easy to imagine God as an unjust or absent judge in our lives. But that's not who God is. God's grace defines God. God's love for the widow and all people is greater than all of the unjust judges we can find in the Bible, in our world today, and even the judging that goes on in our own heads. Think about that presence and the love of God for the widow and for you this morning. Now think about the persistent, strong, and courageous widow dealing with the judge. How do you think the judge would describe or experience her persistence, strength, and courage? How would other men in positions of authority this day describe or experience her persistence, strength, and courage? How would you experience and describe the widow this day? What words would you use? Those words, persistent, strong, and courageous, might be replaced with annoying, abrasive, and aggressive. Or they might be replaced, as we've heard recently, with other words. You know them. Maybe you've used them. Maybe you've been called them. Words that are used to demean. Words that are used to exert power and verbally abuse. Words that shock, words that hurt, and words that are inappropriate to say here in church or anywhere for that matter. And yet these words roll off the tongue of some and reflect more than misogyny. They speak of power and privilege and of a rape culture that is pervasive, from reality shows to presidential candidates. Now, let me be very clear. This is not a political endorsement of one candidate or another. This is, though, the noticing and the naming of sin in the world. And thankfully, it is not for me to judge, because Jesus, our Christ, will do that. And I realize this day that we have bumper stickers for all kinds of folks in our parking lot, and that we're not divided by this aisle by one party or another, but we are gathered together as God's people in a world where both presidential candidates from the major parties evoke hatred from the polarized segments of our society. Like me, both are flawed human beings, and thankfully both are children of God as well. As a friend recently shared, all saints have a past, and all sinners have a future. Thank God for that. My role this day is not to tell you who to vote for. My role is to point out the trouble and grace in the world and in the text of God's story. My role is to say that we, as followers of Jesus, are not to be silent or complicit when we encounter sin and evil in the world. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, affiliated with another party, or unregistered and independent. When the sin of misogyny and the culture of rape and power and privilege are present, our silence to it is a sin. In worship each week, we confess about the things we have done and the things that we have left undone. Saying that boys will be boys, or that demeaning speech and actions are locker room talk or behavior, are things that we have done that we need to confess. And silently looking the other way, trying to pretend it will all end in November, our not going and voting. Those are the things that we have left undone and need to confess. As a pastor ordained in the Lutheran Church, and someone with some German ancestry, I'm deeply convicted by the words and actions of Martin Niemöller, a German Lutheran pastor who emerged as an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler, spending 7 years in Nazi concentration camps. And he's perhaps best remembered by these words that many of you may know. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Beloveds, we are called to be persistent and strong and courageous, as the widow in our parable this day. We are called to talk about the difference between God's justice and our justice. You know our justice. We tend to think of justice as getting even or making everything fair. God's judgment and justice is not about being fair. God's justice is good things for the oppressed, for the abused, for the voiceless. God's justice is about transformation for the oppressor, for the abuser, for the silencer of voices, and for those of us that just wish it would all go away. Beloveds, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future because of Jesus the Christ. In one of my wrestling moments this week, I sat with a colleague, and afterwards I received an email from a prayer that was written based on the epistle reading for this day. I'm grateful for that colleague. And I'm grateful for the Reverend Elsa Anders Cook who wrote it. Let us be in a prayerful place. Oh God, help us to remember how you called us out and gathered us from the margins to be your church. Every good word you have spoken across the generations reminds us of this radical reorientation you made in our world. Teach us again. Correct us and train us in your righteousness, so that every one of us might be so well equipped in your love that we do not seek to dominate and conquer, but to be changed by your message for this world. Help us to continue. Remind us that to fight the good fight and carry out our ministry fully is to remember that good news can be found in hardship, and that there is salvation that can change our whole world. In Jesus Christ, let us not die, but let us live in your hope, O God. Help us to continue. For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths. Let it be Christ who judges, not us. Convince us, rebuke us, and encourage us with the utmost patience in your teaching. Help us to continue. Do not let us forget what we have learned and firmly believed in every good word you have spoken. Let it be that radical change toward the kingdom that helps us to decide how, what we will speak and share. Help us to continue in the radical way of your hope and your love, especially in this unfavorable time, O God.